microbiologist, former professor at Johannes Gutenberg University. He said this: "We are afraid that 1 million infections with the new virus will lead to 30 deaths per day over the next 100 days. But we do not realize that 20, 30, 40, or 100 patients positive for normal coronaviruses are already dying every day." He is a world-renowned scientist, I think compared to the best published hundreds of, over 300 articles on immunology, bacteriology, virology, and parasitology. He has written a book with another professor, Karina Reese, who is also written, I think, over 60 articles, there we go, in cell biology, biochemistry, inflammation and infection. They got together and wrote a book, really the scientific perspective of what really happened, the false alarm of coronavirus. This book has sold, my understanding, nearly 300,000 copies, hard copies across Europe, tens of thousands of copies online, but it was in German, as the work they're doing is in Germany. The English version is now about to come out. My understanding is I think it's October 2nd. This book is going to release and I just read it. It is absolutely mind-blowing. A lot of the things that we've already covered, but it is really great to see great scientists now putting out this information. But I want to say that when we list the 100 greatest scientists in the world that are all standing up to tell the truth, there is nothing that is a greater honor than to be able to say they're now joining us on the high wire, and that's what I can say right now. It is my privilege and my pleasure to be bringing on Professor Sucharit Bhakdi and Dr. Karina Rice. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for writing this incredibly clear and concise explanation of how we got into this mess. To begin with, Dr. Bhakdi, why write this book? I mean, we live in a time where we are seeing so much ridicule, so much pressure, even, professors losing their professorship, being kicked out of universities, or pressure onto the work that they're doing. You, I think, took a serious risk writing this book. Why did you do it?
Well, actually, it was my wife, Karina Rice. We're married. We don't have the same name, but we're married.
Okay, good to know.
Also have a child. And you see, we were both very, very, we were
concerned.
So upset, concerned, and depressed. My wife was so depressed that she was falling ill. She was getting stomach cramps. She couldn't sleep, and she has an old, sick mother who was doing very badly because of this crisis, forced to wear a mask. She collapsed in the supermarket because of the mask that she was wearing. And then Karina said suddenly, "I can't stand it." I had been, making videos and talking to people via the videos, and they were seen many, many times, millions of times. But the thing, the video didn't stay. So Karina said, we need something that people will be able to read and reread and come back to read whenever they want to have the facts. And so she sat down and she actually wrote, let's say, 80% of this book. It was a horrible lot of work because there are the literature's there. There are over 200 citations, and anyone can go in and check what we have written here, and they will see that everything that is written there is referenced.
Dr. Rice, let me jump in here because I think that a lot of people that just heard how your husband described your emotional state, so many people watching this show, so many people we know that have dealt with, that are scientists themselves, or simply just feeling like there's no reason. They're not seeing reason. We're not seeing the debate. We're hearing, one side of the story. But for you, as a professor, as you've been published, you do this work, to think about knots in your stomach. What is it like as a scientist to see how this science has been performed around this world, how it's been forced upon people, Is it scary? Are we looking at the potential death of science if debate is not allowed?
It's scary, yes. It's what we're looking at, a crime against mankind. It's not only the vaccination, it's everything around us. All these measures that destroy the childhood of our kids, that lead to so much suffering around us. So many people in our friends of ours, they could not go to the hospitals. They were afraid. It was such a panic pandemic. It wasn't not a virus pandemic, but a panic pandemic. People were afraid of a virus that's comparable to common cold viruses or even influenza, but it's not a killer virus. And so I was really depressed. But on the other hand, I get so many phone calls from my colleagues around me and emails, and all are saying the same. We understand completely what's going on, but if we would say something, we will lose our jobs. So we are afraid we can't say anything. And that's why the list of scientists who stand up is still relatively small, because so many people around us are really afraid of losing their jobs because the pressure is really high.
I read this book over the last couple of days. It's a really easy read. It's beautifully written. It's so clear. A lot of times you're worried if you're going to write a book or read a book written by scientists that somehow it's going to be hard to understand, but it's very, very clearly laid out. You know, we like to bring excerpts out of a book, and I'm telling you, I had this morning, there was probably about 50 different quotes, and I said, we can't do 50 quotes, but let me just go through a couple of them from the book to get a sense of some of the things you've stated, and maybe we can talk about the details of what you meant by that. Here's the first quote that I wanted to read. Each positive laboratory test for the virus was to be reported as a COVID-19 case, irrespective of clinical presentation. This definition represented an unforgivable breach of a first rule in infectiology: the necessity to differentiate between infection, which is invasion and multiplication of an agent in the host, and infectious disease, infection with ensuing illness. COVID-19 is the designation for severe illness that occurs only in about 10% of infected individuals, but because of incorrect designation, the number of cases surged. Just leaves us up for a second. When you say that it was an unforgivable breach of a first rule in infectiology, explain that to me.
Well, I've taught this for 30 years, and among the things that you say in the first hours of infectious disease lectures is that you've got to differentiate between infection and illness, infectious disease, all right? So as we now know, the number of infections with this coronavirus has skyrocketed because the virus is a very successful virus. It does not tend to kill the host. The most successful parasites and viruses are those that don't kill the host. And these coronaviruses are among the most successful. And therefore, if you look at people under 70 with no pre-existing illnesses, it is almost impossible to die because of the virus. So half of them will not even realize that they have the virus, and another 30 to 40% will not fall seriously ill. And if you're under 70, it goes even further. In fact, the death rate among people below 70 is way under 1%. It is probably in the order of 0.1 or even 0.01%. I'm saying this because it's telling everyone around the world that if you are under 70 and have no pre-existing illness, don't worry about this virus, as little as you worry about getting even the flu. The flu is more dangerous to these people who are under 70 than the coronavirus. And I'll jump right to the point. That is why we said all along that this whole business of vaccination, mass vaccination of young people, is going to fail. it cannot succeed because there's no reason to do it.
Do you think that is a lot of what they're getting away with because people don't understand they don't understand these terms, right? The difference between being infectious, infected, or having the illness. To help people understand, a lot of us get coronaviruses every year, or even flu viruses where we are asymptomatic, right? I think a lot of this is being made as though it's a brand new term, but, you know, Dr. Rice, isn't it true that we've just never focused on the people that don't have symptoms because that just means you're healthy, you have enough, you know, cross-reactive, you know, T-cell immunity or other things, but we've just never talked about these things. And so they're using that lack of knowledge against people to make them afraid of something that's a common occurrence. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, completely true. Of course, there's no reason to look at people who don't have any symptoms and are not suffering and not ill. So our little son is in the kindergarten, and in the first winter he has this running nose all the time, of course, and the coughing. And so, but these are the normal coronavirus, and it's good that children get exposed to them because then they develop their immune system, and then they are prepared if one day maybe a real dangerous virus comes. So SARS-CoV-2 was not a real dangerous virus, but it's very important that we train our immune system with these common colds. And of course, if you just sneeze around, there's no reason to do anything. But now it was so stupid and senseless that we really got angry at this stupid and absurd situation.
Let me look at another quote here. This is the next quote I thought was interesting. It's along the same lines of how they decide to count things. Another serious mistake was that every deceased person who had tested positive for the virus entered the official records as a coronavirus victim. This method of reporting violated all international medical guidelines. The absurdity of giving COVID-19 as the cause of death in a patient who dies of cancer needs no comment. Correlation does not imply causation. This was causal fallacy that was destined to drive the world into a catastrophe. Truth surrounding the virus remained shrouded in a tangle of rumors, myths, and beliefs. Now, people that have been watching the High Wire are used to this concept because this is what I've been saying the whole time. But here's why this book's important. Bring that quote up again. Once again, I've never been able to say that this method of reporting violated all international medical guidelines. There were guidelines, right? They've changed the protocol, changed the way that they're doing everything, and then pointing to these brand new numbers and comparing them to the old way of doing something. Just randomly, it reminds me for people that are out there, if you watch sports, you know, when you look at speed ice skating, well, once they changed the skate so that the skate could open up and stay in contact with the ice, everybody is putting up different numbers. You can't compare a new way of doing something with the old way of doing something. You can't take a new way of calculating the numbers and say, see how much more dangerous it is than the old numbers? Well, you never counted it this way. You never said that a person dying of cancer actually died of the flu. It's an incredible point, but are you alone on this, or are there a lot of scientists talking about this around the world?
There are surprisingly few scientists who make this point, but you see, the correct way of reporting the cause of death has been the motor behind driving advance. You see, take for instance lung cancer. It's because people were, you know, when someone died of lung cancer, it was lung cancer. And today, if you have lung cancer and you're tested positive for corona, you're a corona death. And the lung cancer is forgotten. That means that the incidence of lung cancer may be going down in the next years, which would be very bad, because it was because people saw that there were so many people in the Western Hemisphere who got lung cancer that the scientists started asking, what was the common denominator? And then they came down to the cigarettes, of course, and nicotine. And then all the science started that showed that smoking was dangerous and caused lung cancer. This sort of thing would not happen and will not happen if we continue obscuring the truth with a false diagnosis.
a brilliant point. Karina, what are you doing to try to get other scientists? I mean, it's not lost on me. Why would it be lost on scientists that study this stuff?
Yeah, it's difficult. So there are always a few who want to make profit out of this, of course. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's always difficult to get money for scientific research. It's really a hard business to get money, and research is really expensive. And now you have the opportunity to get huge amount of money, millions of euros or dollars, to do science on a virus that we won't have in 2 years anymore, because it will be mutated and it will look different. So, but in the moment you can get so much money, it's unbelievable, and so many are trying to profit from the situation. That's for sure. Others, as I mentioned, others they have fear because they might lose their jobs. They are really threatened, and others are really focusing just on their own scientific things, and they don't want to keep actively out of this. But I think in this situation that we have, this very special situation where we're looking at something that we never experienced before in this democracy, also in Germany and all around the world, I think the scientists have to stand up. And what we try to do in every 3 minutes that we have is that we try to convince people. We're giving talks in the cities here around in Germany, and we try to inform the people so that they really that they wake up. That's the thing that we can do, and we really spend quite a lot of time to do this.
Very good. You know, you make a good point, though, and I hadn't thought about that. On the one hand, you have scientists that are afraid, but you have this massive cash cow right now. Why fight an industry that's just going to hand you millions and millions of dollars for research? You had a great line in here, something like, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is doing science out there. We're going to have more of the most irrelevant science that's ever been done on anything. It's not going to point to anything. The outcomes, as you've said, we're going to be so focused on coronavirus that we may even hurt the data collection in the real issues like lung cancer, heart disease, COPD, and diabetes that's going on. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I've never seen a lot of times science always says, well, that's anecdotal. This entire thing is so anecdotal, it's incredible. If they find one person in the world that gets reinfected with coronavirus, they say, see, you can be reinfected, the antibodies don't last, or the T cells don't work, as though these anomalies are the truth in science. Or there's another problem where they start they make it novel, right? They take a symptom or an issue and call it novel when it's been happening all the time. That's why I thought this next quote was really interesting. A high frequency of lung embolisms was already described in deceased influenza patients 50 years ago. Thus, we are not on the verge of discovering a unique property of SARS-CoV-2 that would heighten its threat, but we do bear witness to the absurd situation where the elderly seek to protect themselves by obeying the chant that sounds around the world: stay at home. Physical inactivity is pre-programmed, thrombosis included. Swedish epidemiologist Professor Johan Giesecke recommended exactly the opposite. As much fresh air and activity as possible. The man knows his job. I mean, you make an interesting point. We say, first of all, look, we've got this embolism problem. We have these blood clots in the lungs. This is why COVID-19 is so dangerous. You're pointing out that has been one of the effects, one of the problems with multiple different respiratory conditions. But even worse, you exacerbate the issue if you sit for a long time and you're elderly. You exacerbate it if you're not out getting exercise and air. So in many ways, by pointing this out, they aren't protecting anybody. They're scaring everybody into the one position that they're going to increase their risk.
Right.
Does that make you want to scream from the top of a mountaintop?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Terrible.
Amazing.
So it's not only that people were not moving around. So it's very important that old people get fresh air, they move, that they do something for themselves, meet other people. These to be without social context is it's such counterproductive. It's unbelievable. And moreover, so in Germany they said, don't visit anyone. So please, your son or daughter might bring the food and put it in front of the door. Then you just have to open the door and get the food inside, and don't touch anyone, don't meet anyone. So, but especially the olders, which have serious diseases, and then they get their heart attack or something else, then you need someone who's there to go to the telephone to help you. You need someone who's taking care of you. But we left all these people alone, and they were dying alone because they did not go to the hospital, because they thought when we go to the hospital they are overwhelmed and maybe I get COVID-19, oh God. So I stay at home, and then so many people died at home so senselessly.
It's amazing, you know, and when
And
you...
those,
Amazing.
Go ahead,
yeah,
Dr. Bach.
and those who went to the hospital to die there died in utter loneliness. This was the most inhuman thing that the politicians did. To, you know, it's the weakest of the society that has suffered the most. The old people, the dying. Who wants to die alone? It's so inhuman to impose this on them, to close the hospitals. We saw, you know, relatives, people standing outside the hospital crying because their father, their mother, their grandmother was dying inside and not allowed to see anyone. This is so ridiculous. And we were not able to understand how society would accept this, but they did. And this is very, very scary. The second thing is our children who are forced to wear these damned, stupid masks. Such an idiocy. You know, I tell the people around here, you know, I'm Buddhist, but I tell them God gave you 3 gifts, and the 3 greatest gifts that he gave you were your face, your voice, with the voice, because this is what makes you the individual, the human that you are. No animal has this gift of God. Then your brain with which you can think, Homo sapiens, the wise, the knowing. And third, your soul and your heart with which you can love and care. And now what is happening is that politics has changed the whole world. Dehumanize them. Don't show your face anymore. Keep yourself masked. Don't interact. Your children are going to grow up weird, I tell you. There are going to be long-lasting effects on their psyche. And this is immoral. It should really be punished. Then stop thinking. If you start doubting anything we say, then you're going to get fired. You know, I was a guest in her lab because I'm retired now. So I joined her lab. I had an official status as the guest of the University of Kiel. I have been not fired. I was never hired. I never received a salary. But I no longer am allowed to enter the lab and do science. Okay? So they kicked me out as well as they could. And third, harden your soul. Don't feel sorry for those old guys who are dying alone. Don't feel sorry for the people who are going broke because you destroyed their existence.
Yeah.
They'll be okay. Someone will take care of them. See that you protect yourself so that you don't go and endanger those guys who will then you know, die because of you. I mean, this is absolutely perfidious. It's perfidious. Sorry, I had to say this.
And you make such great points, because we're being guilted into believing that if we don't wear the mask, we're putting the elderly at risk, that how could we be so selfish? But you make a great point. How about all of the millions of elderly that are dying this year naturally, whether it's cancer or heart disease? They're in those last years of life, and you are making them die all alone with no one around them, no one to say goodbye to, no one to hug them, to take care of them. Where is the inhumanity there? I'm inhuman because I'm not concerned about a cold virus that is naturally going to be very dangerous for anyone in that situation. And because I'm not worried about that cold, I want to be able to go and visit my grandma or my grandfather in their last days so that they have someone around them. That's the inhumanity, and you made such a great point pointing that out. What was really interesting, because you are both, prolific scientists in Germany, you actually were involved with reaching out to Angela Merkel and you wrote letters, right? Why is it there's only, as you said, like 2 scientists that are doing all of the talking in Germany, and the rest of you are not being included? I mean, it seems to me, if this is truly a pandemic, and we are truly concerned and going to forge new territory into new ways of dealing with something, locking down, we've never locked down the world before, why are you not a part of the conversation?
Well, because dissidents are not wanted, and there's a lot of pressure being put on us. But we have to say that we are now gaining a little bit of hope. There's a ray of hope, a ray of sunshine, because more and more scientists and doctors are standing up now to say no. They really, across the globe, and we're in contact with them. We've formed an association of scientists and medics, and we have thousands of members already.
Great.
So we're not quite alone, no. There are others, and some very, very prolific and very, very excellent scientists among them.
Well, I want to thank you for the work you've done. We could go on and on. This book is full of tons of science and information describing all the different ways that this thing has been manufactured. I think the best way, everyone, this is where you're going to be able to purchase it. Go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It comes out at the very beginning of October. This is the book you hand to all of your friends that are running around with masks, screaming their heads off, won't let you in the house, terrified to go out in the air, waiting for a vaccine that will never work. There's even incredible discussions about the vaccines, why we would need a vaccine, the questions we should ask. But I think I'd like to just finish this out with the very last statement that you make in the book, because I think it's very powerful. Here's how the book ends. And as you read these lines, human experiments are underway with gene-based vaccines whose ominous dangers have never been revealed to the thousands of unknowing volunteers. We are bearing witness to the downfall and destruction of our heritage, to the end of the age of enlightenment. May this little book awaken Homo sapiens of this earth to rise and live up to their name and put an end to this senseless self-destruction. I couldn't say it better. I want to thank you for your time. I hope that we'll be able to bring you on again and we can get into more details as this moves forward, as we really try and look at what these vaccines are doing and not doing. Are they safe? This is going to become, I think, a more and more intense issue. And I'd love to help work with the group of scientists that you've put together. Actually, I'm going to call you right after this because I think that there's some politicians looking for some help, and maybe we can get some real international bodies of scientists behind politicians that might be moving in the right direction. So we'll have that conversation off the record. But thank you so much for having the courage, for standing up for all of those international scientists that may be afraid to do so. I hope that they will follow in your footsteps, and maybe they'll write a book too. Everybody, don't miss this book. It's really brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Bhakdi, Professor Rice, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.